in different parts of Europe. This was the birth of the Reformation, and with it the vast worldly power of the Catholic Church, at least as Leo had inherited it, was irrevocably broken. That obscure, pedantic Wittenberg priest had somehow won the war. Interpretation. Luther's original intention in his 95 Theses was to discuss a point of theology, the relationship, or lack of it, between God's forgiveness and papal indulgences. But when he read Prierius's response to his argument, something changed in him. The Pope and his men had failed to find justification for indulgences in the Bible. There was much more they could not justify as well, such as the Pope's unlimited power to excommunicate. Luther came to believe that the Church needed drastic reform. Reformation, however, would require political power. If Luther simply railed at the Church's wickedness from the pulpit or among his fellow priests, he would get nowhere. The Pope and his men had attacked him personally, questioning his motives. Now Luther, in turn, would go on the offensive, fighting fire with fire. Luther's strategy was to make the war public, transforming his moral cause into a political one. He did this by exploiting the previous century's advances in printing technology. His tracts, written in vigorous, angry language that appealed to the masses, were widely disseminated. He chose points of attack that would particularly outrage the German people: the Pope's decadent lifestyle, funded through the sale of indulgences, the use of church power to meddle in German politics, on and on. Perhaps most devastating of all, Luther exposed the Church's hypocrisies. Through these various tactics, he was able to spark and stoke a moral anger that spread like fire, forever tainting the public's vision not just of the Pope, but of the Church itself. Luther knew that Leo would respond to him not with arguments based on the Bible, but with heavy-handed force, which he also knew would only make his cause shine all the brighter. And so, with incendiary language and arguments that questioned Leo's authority, he baited the Pope into rash counterattacks. Luther already led an exemplary life, but he took it further by refusing all income from his writings. This widely known move, in effect, made his goodness theatrical, a matter for public consumption. In a few short years, Luther gained so much support among the masses that the Pope could not fight him without provoking a revolution. By using morality so consciously and publicly, he transformed it into a strategy for winning power. The Reformation was one of the greatest political victories in history. Understand, you cannot win wars without public and political support, but people will balk at joining your side or cause unless it seems righteous and just. And as Luther realized, presenting your cause as just takes strategy and showmanship. First, it is wise to pick a fight with an enemy that you can portray as authoritarian, hypocritical, and power-hungry. Using all available media, you strike first with a moral offensive against the opponent's points of vulnerability. You make your language strong and appealing to the masses, and craft it, if you can, to give people the opportunity to express a hostility they already feel. You quote your enemy's own words back at them to make your attacks seem fair, almost disinterested. You create a moral taint that sticks to them like glue. Baiting them into a heavy-handed counterattack will win you even more public support. Instead of trumpeting your own goodness, which would make you seem smug and arrogant, you show it through the contrast between their unreasonable actions and your own crusading deeds. Aim at them the most withering charge of all, that they are after power, while you are motivated by something higher and selfless. Do not worry about the manipulations you will have to resort to if you are to win this moral battle. Making a public show that your cause is more just than the enemy's will amply distract people from the means you employ. By Carl Schmitt. There always are concrete human groupings which fight other concrete human groupings in the name of justice, humanity, order, or peace. When being reproached for immorality and cynicism, the spectator of political phenomena can always recognize in such reproaches a political weapon used in actual combat. Keys to warfare. In almost all cultures, morality, the definition of good and evil, originated as a way to differentiate one class of people from another. In ancient Greece, for example, the word for good was first associated with the nobility, the higher classes who served the state and proved their bravery on the battlefield. The bad, the base, self-centered, and cowardly, were generally the lower classes. Over time, a system of ethics evolved that served a similar but more sophisticated function: to keep society orderly by separating the antisocial and evil from the social and good. Societies use ideas about what is and is not moral to create values that serve them well. When these values fall behind the times or otherwise cease to fit, morality slowly shifts and evolves. There are individuals and groups, however, who use morality for a much different purpose: not to maintain social order, but to extract an advantage in a competitive situation, such as war, politics, or business. In their hands, morality becomes a weapon they yield to attract attention to their cause while distracting attention from the nastier, less noble actions inevitable in any power struggle. They tend to play on the ambivalence we all have about conflict and power, exploiting our feelings of guilt for their purposes. For instance, they may position themselves as victims of injustice so that opposing them seems wicked or insensitive. Or they may make such a show of moral superiority that we feel ashamed to disagree with them. They are masters at occupying the high ground and translating it into some kind of power or advantage. Let us call these strategists moral warriors. There are generally two types: unconscious and conscious. Unconscious moral warriors tend to be motivated by feelings of weakness. They may not be so good at the straightforward game of power, so they function by making other people feel guilty and morally inferior. An unconscious, reflexive way of leveling the playing field. Despite their apparent fragility, they are dangerous on an individual level because they seem so sincere and can have great power over people's emotions. Conscious moral warriors are those who use the strategy knowingly. They are most dangerous on a public level, where they can take the high ground by manipulating the media. Luther was a conscious moral warrior, but being also a genuine believer in the morality he preached, he used the strategy only to help him in his struggle with the Pope. Slipperier moral warriors tend to use it indiscriminately, adapting it to whatever cause they decide to take on. The way to combat moral warriors in general is indicated by certain strategies that have evolved in modern warfare itself. The French officer and writer André Beaufre has analyzed the use of morality as a military strategy in the contexts of the French-Algerian Wars of the 1950s and of the Vietnam Wars fought by first France and then the United States. Both the Algerians and the North Vietnamese worked hard to frame each of their respective conflicts as a war of liberation fought by a nation struggling for its freedom against an imperialistic power. Once this view was diffused in the media and accepted by many in the French and American publics, the insurgents were able to court international support, which in turn served to isolate France and the United States in the world community. Appealing directly to groups within these countries that were latently or overtly sympathetic to, or at least ambivalent about their cause, they were able to sap support for the war from within. At the same time, they cleverly disguised the many nasty maneuvers to which they themselves resorted